All right, everybody, welcome back to the Identity Jedi Podcast Show. We are back with another special guest. We are so excited, as we always are, to be bringing you very exciting conversations going on in identity and access management. Before we get to the episode, of course, let's do a quick check-in. Samir, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. As you can see from my background, I'm back in a regular office and not a kid's playroom. So I like doing things from here. It feels professional.
You know, I think, though, like in the kids' playroom background, like I think you get a little bit more joy, right? Like you look at things and be like, oh, maybe that's not so bad. Sometimes professional can be a little bad, man. I think sometimes we can learn things from kids, right? I think we take things too seriously. Well, it's cool.
I agree with that.
You know, you're back in your office. That's good. I'm good, man. Just got back from a quick little vacation. Went down to Puerto Rico. Had some fun in the sun. Yeah, I'm back at it, right? Back on the grind. I've been having a lot of fun programming, which is weird because I haven't done it in so long. So that's been cool. Been learning a lot about Next.js and nerding out on that. It's been pretty cool. So,
nice.
Typical days, man. Yeah. All right, so let's get to our special guest, Mr. Jamie Wallace. Thanks. Welcome to the show, sir.
It is great to be here, David and Samir. I love the podcast. Really honored to be able to join you.
Yeah, now we're super glad to have you on. I know when we did our pre-prod kind of discussions, right, we're kind of going through some things we're going to talk about. I got really excited because I really want to dig into just like your philosophy and what you've learned in your career and identity. And we'll get to all those things here in a second. But it's always kind of nice hearing other people's journey through like identity, especially when you've seen like such things at scale. And that's kind of going to be a theme like we'll kind of get to here in a little bit, because I tell people all the time, like identity is one thing, right? And there's all these problems you kind of have to solve with it, all these things. But like, then when you take that to scale, when you start talking about like millions of identities and having to do all this stuff, like within short windows, like it's like a completely different thing, right? Like it's like a totally different level. Everything changes. And so it's like, even though I'm solving the same problems, you kind of have to like address them completely differently. And so as we'll get into it, like, I'm very interested to just kind of hear like, about how that shaped, your view of identity. And so not to spoil it, we'll get into that here in a little bit. But before we do that, just give us a little bit about your background, how you got into identity, and then we'll kind of get into some of the main topics.
Yeah, I am what I think of as a bit of an outlier in the identity space, in that I came to it from cybersecurity at its core. And I still think of myself as a cybersecurity generalist who just, in order to round out, has gotten into identity. Nice. So the journey started small financial services company, then consultant for Deloitte, then joined AT&T for 20 years and came up through the ranks as an analyst to a security engineer to a BISO, business information security officer, to landed in identity and access management. I'm leading the product management team of that, and that's where we operated it at quite the scale. 100 million plus consumer identities. Also had responsibility for more than 1 million internal identities, counting employees, contractors, retirees. Also had FirstNet, which is a first responder network that AT&T runs on behalf of a federal government agency, which then federated with law enforcement agencies, which is a whole different sort of identity problem to start sorting through, some B2B connections. So really got a taste of identity at scale there. And I describe it as like, there's the massive identities of like the Googles and Amazons and just the billions of identities out there in the world, and then there's the really big companies that are probably still running off the shelf, but they're really maxing it out. Yeah. And that was the experience at AT&T. It's just like, it's a different computer science problem based on the number of zeros you put on the end of stuff, and when you start talking about billions of entitlements, like it's a whole different thing of how you solve problems like that. Left AT&T a couple of years ago to lead risk management at the retail side of a small book distributor called Amazon, which was a fun journey for a little while. And then most recently, where I'm at right now, is I'm a vice president of cybersecurity and identity engineering at Travelers Insurance. We're the 6th largest property casualty insurance company in the country. I've got responsibility for both internal and external identity and access management, as well as the security engineering part, which some might argue still comes under access management. So I've got firewall rules, I've got PKI, secrets management, EDR, all those kind of things. At some level, we're all just controlling access. So loving, helping transform companies that have been around this long with this kind of legacy.
Yeah, all the fun stuff, man. And you know what? It's funny, like, I know you can still get books on Amazon, but it's like as soon as you said that, I just thought I was like, I keep forgetting that that's how they started. Like,
yeah.
A book company. It's like,
yeah. I think AWS has kind of become a mind meld, and everyone thinks of Amazon as mostly, and the revenue numbers actually do show that AWS is the fastest growing business, but it was a bookstore online, right? That's where we all, the older generation, maybe we're older.
That's how they proved the model. So, yeah.
It's kind of interesting hearing your journey, Jamie, and you mentioned that you're one of those few people that have come to identity from cybersecurity. It's also the breadth of what you've done in cybersecurity, right? Being a BSO, so you're working with your internal customers, you've been a risk management leader, and then you're running engineering, which, as you rightly mentioned, has a big part to do with access governance, access management. It's kind of unique, and I guess there's a question here somewhere, and the question is, how do you feel that has made you a more well-rounded identity leader?
Yeah, it's something I've come to somewhat naturally in the sense of when I'm involved in an organization, like I did newspaper in high school, and I wrote articles, and then I took pictures, and then I did layout, and then I was the editor, and I just have this natural generalist bend, and that's what brought me to identity. Is I basically went, hey, if I want to be a CISO one day, which we can debate whether any of us actually want to do that, but it's a goal that you point at. Where are my gaps? And so there were some sort of leadership gaps that I've worked on, but as far as technology, I felt like identity was the area I knew the least, and my learning style is dive in with both feet. And so I think what I bring uniquely to it is a threat and risk-based approach. A lot of identity people can talk to you about entitlement management and leaver, joiner, mover, and all of these sort of jargony buzzwords of things, but hey, how does that actually meet what the bad guys are doing right now? And how do we then prioritize our work? I've seen a lot of identity people who are really good at driving efficiencies or really good at consolidation or things like that. I think maybe a unique strength of mine is more of a risk focus on why is it that we should do this before that, and how do we sort all of that out.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say more of that risk focus. I find that I've had this conversation the last couple of weeks, and that's been coming up, right? Just how do we start talking about this in more of a risk perspective? And I find that interesting to hear that from, it'll be either CISOs or directors of programs as they are battling with how do we talk about this a little bit more with the business and put it in terms that they understand. And so it's interesting. Risk keeps coming back around that. Risk was always a thing in identity that it was the cute little feature that always looked good in demos. And then nobody ever used it. Nobody ever actually built anything around it. So interesting. The question I got there is how much does from that cybersecurity, standpoint of it, right? How much does risk come into play in explaining identity or helping into that business justification?
Yeah, I think it's the core of everything we do. I just think maybe we use that 4-letter word slightly differently across, right? And so do I go check a checkbox that is going to do risk-based authentication, and all of a sudden that drives? And that's when you say risk to identity people, that's kind of what they run to. Oh yeah, I can do risk. I can right. No, I'm talking about should I be more focused on internally my entitlement management? Is that more over-provisioned internal users? Is that more of an existential threat to a ransomware attack, or is multi-factor authentication, right? Is my credential reset process, is that more where the bad actors are going to come and I should be focused in? Or is it, this, some other sort of process, right? And that's what I think what I do well. It's not necessarily that I can then come to the business and say, hey, we're focusing on this because the bad actors are doing that. And oh, by the way, one of the biggest conversations with the business is they assume that if I'm asking to do something, that I'm adding friction to their world. And I like multi-factor authentication doesn't mean more effort. Right? I think I need to get a t-shirt made that says that, because people just think if I'm not working harder, then it's not more secure. And so many of the technologies we have now with passkeys or hello, or if you can, use ML to do RBAC to build roles natively, or, some of the things that we're getting with AI coming in as well, like we can actually come to the business and say, listen, we're going to absorb the complexity for you, and we could maybe even reduce the friction and add security, right? And like, that's the conversation I love. Like, how do we make security more usable? Because ultimately, you drive down risk by getting security solutions that are accepted, not just by cool engineering. And so if we're not thinking from our users' perspective of like, how do we make it easy for them to be secure, I think we're doing them a disservice. And it's one of the things that attracts me to identity is it's like where the human meets the technology is largely identity and in the security realm. And it's a really unique space we get to play. There's some psychology in there. There's some user experience design in there. There's some technical innovation. And like how we combine that together, you don't get to do that in deploying EDR rules. You don't get to do that. And I mean, the threat guys out there, they would say, yeah, they do some of that, but man, there's not a lot of psychology in GRC. It's like follow the rules or we're going to beat you. And like that. And that's what's fun about identity is it's like, hey, how can I help empower people to get their job done by quickly getting them access to what they need to get access to, but blocking everything out and use technology to do that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I love that you said process, because if you don't understand the process that users follow to get access to what they need to do and when they need it, then you'll create unnecessary friction, or you'll create friction where it's not reducing quote unquote risk and being able to measure it. So I like that you focus on that. And I think you're right. It's not a product at the end of the day. It's a solution and how it works within your environment. That's just as important, if not more important. And I think there's two disconnects, right? One is I'm reducing risk because I bought a new threat intel tool. I bought a new vaporware, whatever that is, right? And the flip side is I'm reducing risk because you created some pain for me to log in, and I'm just going to give up and not log in anymore. And therefore, there's no risk because I'm not getting access to my sensitive data. But then you're not doing your job, right? And then there's a whole different animal around that one. So good call out, man.
In general, though, when you do the second kind of reducing risk, they don't just go, I'm just not going to do my job. They just figure out how to work around you.
That's right.
Right? They're just like, I'm just going to take it to my home laptop, do it there, and then, I have no controls there, right? So if I'm not figuring out how to make it easy for them to do the right thing in the space that I want them to work in, I have every confidence that they're going to work around me.
Yeah, and it's this kind of combination of both, security, convenience, and then this is probably more personally for me, like the privacy aspect of it. Because I'll tell you, my background, I grew up working for the government, right? So I started contracting when I came out of college. So
So you've been invading our privacy for years.
Exactly. So I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, this is how I started. Like, my first log on to anything was a prompt that says, we own you. Everything you do, expect no privacy here. Okay, cool. But because I started my career as a developer, right? And so part of the things that I knew that I struggled with when I would go, work for say in a company, you give me a laptop and I'm like, okay, but I'm a developer. But I don't want to have to then go put in a request to go get something else, right? And then it's like, well, tell me what you're going to do. And it's like, I don't know, right? I'll know when I start developing it. And my whole point was there was just always just like, I don't really want to develop on your lab. So to your point, I'll develop on my home rig, or I'll develop on here where I have what I need to be able to do. I can be more effective, get my stuff done, and then we'll move it over. And, eventually I think organizations kind of figured that out. Some would just be like, oh, we'll give you a dev laptop, you have admin. And it's like, yeah, I don't think that's the answer either. How do we make sure that you can get to what you need to get to and insert friction where it needs to be friction? Oh, you need to go install, like NPM, no problem, because you got to be able to install packages. Oh, you're going to go install, you need access to the root folder because you're going to go like mount a new drive. Okay, well, that's a little bit different. Like being able to say, okay, hey, in that time, like, what are you trying to do? And let's help you kind of get that access. But it's like, well, security just says no to everything and makes everything harder, right? And that's not what you want your users to have, because now you've just made everything harder and trying to create a better environment for them because they're already on the defensive. Like, oh, if it's security, it's going to be slower. It's not going to be as accessible. This is going to be crap. And that's not the case. I think we got to do better.
I think it's we can go out and build trust with our users by doing it right, though, right? Like some of these new innovative solutions where, maybe you rolled out OTP over SMS for authentication, and that's not a great experience. It's super easy to roll out, but it's not a great experience. And then you went to an authenticator app, and they're freaking, oh man, I left my phone in the other room. And if you can go to something where like, hey, we put a hardware FIDO key, or we're going to leverage the native FIDO capabilities of your laptop to get you in, and you just like remove friction, like the trust that security can go and earn with the business by actually delivering things like that gives us permission to go do the things we have to do occasionally, which is, we don't have a way to innovate around this. We're just going to have to make life suck for a little while, but we can build the trust with the business to do that. But if we're always the team of no, if we're always the team of making, of getting in the way, like they should resist us. Right? Like, and this is why I think it's important. You see a lot of security teams where they've got like, they're only focused on GRC or security operations or things like that. But if you don't have a focus in your security teams on actually building innovative solutions, like building security technologies that are easier to use then you've outsourced innovation to someone else, and you're just here to go, here's the rules. I'm going to yell at you if you break them, but I'm not actually here to help solve anything. And like, that's the fun part to security for me. I want to be in the middle of bringing solutions to bear. User-centered security solutions is what I've been telling my team there. Our mantra is like, what problems are you solving with the user at the center of it?
What's your take on like having like an actual like usability team within your security team that's like looking at solutions and things? You go out and go, hey, from a UX perspective, from a usability perspective, this is great. Like that's all they do.
Yeah. I mean, I think I actually, between jobs at one point, thought about starting a like security usability consulting. Like I wanted to get a usability person to partner with me and just be like, hey, there's so much stuff out here. And so I think it's hugely important that we get to like change people's experiences. With that, I think of this as the analogy I use frequently is we think of security as like a door. And if we want a secure door, then we lock the door, or we put locks on the door, and insecure, then we just let anyone in and out. And then we put security and usability against each other. And in actuality, if I have 17 locks on a door, nobody's going to use them. And so unusable security is unused security. But if I don't lock the door at all, then maybe the door is very usable, but the house that the door is meant to protect very quickly becomes unusable when you have a bunch of people in it that you don't want in it, right? And so if we don't make security and usability friends, then they're super complementary ideas. So I think that larger teams, I know of stories at some really big companies where they've gone in and had dedicated usability teams, and you see the results. Like if you look at how, say, Google and Facebook manage security and privacy settings, that came out of like deep security UX studies of how you coach people to get through that. That wasn't like a couple of engineers, they have like security checklists and they guide you through it and they suggest things to help you be more secure. I don't think that's the right fit for everyone. And definitely it's a luxury of bigger organizations, but I think it's key if you're in a bigger security org, if you don't have anyone working on usability, like you're missing out, and you're probably giving a really disjointed experience from the rest of your experiences, because that's part of what usability does is goes, make this look on brand, make this fit, right? And it's more than just a set of design standards. So I'm a huge fan. I think we could get way more wins with more people doing usability and security than, some of the other functions we tend to focus on sometimes.
All right. I like that. All right, so real quick, we're gonna take a break, and then when we come back, I wanna change topics, and I wanna ask you some questions about like the broader market, right, and how you see identity and security playing in that market. But we're gonna take a real quick break, and we'll be right back. Listen, there's no way that you're listening to this pod or watching this pod and that you're not subscribed to the Identity Jedi newsletter. Like, seriously, what are you doing? It drops every 2 weeks in your inbox. Insights, reviews, wittiness, everything you want about identity access management is in this newsletter. Subscribe right now. www.theidentitijedi.com. Let's get you back to the pod. Okay, so love the usability aspect of it. I think it's, I always say like, back in the day when we were delivering these products, right, they always would come with, oh, and you can, customize the UI for it. And here it is. I was like, yeah, if you're leaving this up to a developer, like, okay. Cause yeah, we're just going to pick like, okay, whatever, here's some colors, here's that or whatever. And sometimes a lot of these products, right, you are beholden to the usability standards of whatever the product delivered you. They don't really give you a whole lot there to kind of, interact or change with. So, but taking a step back, I want to look at
I'm not convinced that a lot of these products have UX people working on, or really good UX teams working on them. So they're delivering you something pretty generic that wasn't necessarily thought through from a user perspective. That, what entitlements do I want? What's an entitlement, right? Like, it's not a word that normal human beings use, man.
Nope.
Like, anyway.
I can confirm that you are correct in that. I got to tell this story. The one really, really good UX designer that I met, that at the company I was at the time, they hired him, and it was like, he was the perfect UX type of, because he wanted to dig into everything. Like, how does the user truly experience this? How does this make them feel? What are we going to do here? What's this mean? Like, he was asking all those questions. What's this mean? What's this? How are we going to construct that, right? And the process that he went through was long, and it was very detailed, but like what came out of it, not only was it like beautiful design, it was just like, it was easy. Like, we put it in front of customers and they just loved it, right? Problem is, product companies don't want to spend that long developing like UX. They don't want to put in the time of what it takes to go and do that. And this gentleman was just very good at the fact that he had been working in corporate a while, but he's like, okay, he's just really good, right? I can do a lot of this faster than most people can. And what I've noticed is that most companies just don't have the tolerance to really kind of want to invest in UX, right? Maybe that's changing. Not really. Having run product shops at different companies now,
I think, I was just going to add, David, I moved to the other side of being a founder, right? I can tell you, and advising enough companies on this topic, right? I think there's definitely a bias where, and this might be a barrier thing, it might be an all product thing, but there's a bias that all product, the best product managers come from engineering, right? And so what you have is you've got, and I mean this in the nicest way, product managers that are engineers with personality, right? So they're almost like a mouthpiece for engineering. Some of them will be very good at distilling customer expectations, but design becomes the last thing they think about, because what they'll do is we'll build the engine, we'll build the kind of the risk engine or the workflow engine or whatever the engine is, right? Because that's the IP that people say, oh, you can always, that's the most important thing. Then it's like, let me talk to 50, 60, 100 CISOs and get their feedback. And then let me make magic happen and show them slowly some improvements on what I'm finding, what the outcome is, what the integration is. And the last step, unfortunately, is when we bring design in and say, okay, designer, I know you're great, make it work, right? And that's kind of the wrong approach, unfortunately, that results in these disjointed experiences, not just within the product, but I think Jamie and you were talking about even a step above, right? Which is identity is part of a larger cybersecurity ecosystem. Cybersecurity is part of a larger infrastructure and IT ecosystem potentially, right? How do we make these tools work well together? So the experience for the end customer, which is not Jamie who's got an engineering degree or David that's got a PhD or whatever, right? It's about the person who actually has to consume this at the lowest denomination level. Marketing analyst, somebody who's not even, has too much on their plate already. And so a part of me thinks what Jamie was onto with starting his own cybersecurity UX company is how do you make these companies work better together in a more consistent fashion so the end customer is happy end to end, right? Not just, oh, I'm now on the Okta workplace or marketplace. Look at me. I'm just, I'm trusted. That's only half the battle or 1/3 the battle.
Like anything, right? We have to kind of show our math, right? Show how we solve the problem and show like how that leads to, right? As a founder, right? You know this, right? How does that lead me to more sales? How does that lead me to more like it's that carrot's always going to be there. And I think we all know this. Think about like the best product that you've ever used. Like you are so excited about it, and we're all ex-Amazonian, right? So we all know it's about delighting the customer, right? Like when you do that, the customer will tell everybody. Like you're just like, oh my God, I love this product. Like I just and sometimes you can't even explain it. You're just like you tell you got to use it, right? Because it's this, it's great, it's this, whatever it is. If it's when Netflix came out or whatever, there's something that you've used that you're just like everything about it. You just loved it. You loved the experience with it. You loved using it, and you kept using it, right? And I think that's where I think a lot of these companies, and I think both the product companies and then even internal how the companies run this is where you can take from if you look at direct to consumer companies, right? So if we all decided to make our product right now and we didn't want to sell to business, we sold to the consumer, right? What do we have to do? We've got to, the consumers just, they've got so much noise. So number one, we got to create something, we've got to stick out, and then we've got to make the process easy for them to use it. We've got to get the product in their hands as fast as possible. You look at the model now, it's free trials, get them to sign up, all these things or whatever. Why? Because you want that feedback as fast as possible, get it into their hands and make sure they're having a good experience. And so everything about what they create is driven off of that, right? You know, direct to consumer companies are like, hey, let's put this feature out. What does the customers think? They don't like it? Okay, we'll fix this. Like it is a very fast iterative cycle because they realize it's like, if the customer's not happy, they can turn and leave. B2B sometimes like, what is the employee going to do? Quit? I hate the way I request access in this environment, so I'm going to quit. No, they're not, right? They're just going to deal with it, or they're going to find other ways, insecure ways to go and handle it. But they're not going to quit. So you have unfortunately, you have a captive audience. So it's kind of like, well, this can be as shit as we want because you're not going anywhere.
Well, it's because we're really terrible at measuring how bad that is for the company, right? I can measure what would it cost to go buy a new tool. Can I measure and do I care about the productivity impact of people rubber stamping entitlements? Or the security impact of rubber stamping entitlements, of the productivity impact of too many entitlement requests, of the email that is written in some garbly group that I can't freaking understand, and so I let my entitlements expire, and then I've got to go I've never worked in an organization that knows how to measure the impact of that. But delighting the customer, right, an Amazon sort of approach there would be, no, obsessively, we're going to go build the best experience out there because we really care about that, right? It's an empathy-driven thing. It's a, if you'll pardon my French, it's a give a damn. Like, do you actually care about that other person and the experience that they go through? And are you putting yourself in those shoes? I think it's a unique thing that we can bring to bear in the identity space is like, hey, let me go sit in your shoes. Like when I talk to folks and like, did you go ask anyone about this who uses this in the real world? Or like, did you go sit in a coffee shop and offer to buy someone coffee and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or are you just in your own echo chamber? And they're like, I can pick up the phone and call someone and ask their opinion. And you're like, if you don't, like, you're not learning, you're not thinking about how this product ought to actually work. So still have traces of being recovering director of product management here coming out.
It never goes away, man. It never goes away.
No.
Once you go product, like it's, God, I think it's probably one of a lot like engineering, like my background's engineering. So our group is a developer. And then once I switch over to product, I used to always think like, once you're an engineer, like you always see everything from an engineer's perspective, right? So I'm always kind of breaking things down. I was like, dude, product is such the same way. Because now I look at everything as like the first question I'm asking, like, okay, where is this going to? Who's the user for this? Okay, and I work backwards from there, right? Like, what does the user want to do? Okay, well then this is what this needs to focus on. And this is how you can present it to them. And this is how we need to tell the story of what it's going to do and how it's going to help them. Like everything to me comes from a product perspective now. Cause I'm like, at the end of the day, that's how somebody consumes it, no matter what it is, right? They are consuming a product, a feature. I don't care if it's EDR. I don't care if it's a firewall. Like at some point, somebody, some person is going to consume this thing and want to work with it. And you have to understand like, what is it that they want to do? And the more they feel like you've thought about them, they're going to use their product. They're going to use that feature, that product. And so now you've got something like, so there you go. Anybody that's listening to this, you want to establish product market fit in your company, like that's it. Your product market fit is, I've got to get into the shoes of the person that's going to use this, and they got to love using it every single time. That's how you establish product market fit. And I think one of the issues that we struggle with too, with that, is the way these products are designed, right? So Jamie, to your point, like, hey, have you sat down with somebody? Have you showed them this? Like, some of these products don't make it very easy for you to be able to say, let me just put something together and put it out there and say, hey, like, if we did access reviews like this, tell me what you think about it. Like, you can't prototype and throw things out very quickly and iterate on them. It's like, I got to go build the whole thing in a product and then go, now look at it. And then they go, yeah, this sucks. I don't like that. Okay, no problem. Let me go back. You don't have that like quick iterative process where you can just, hey, let's try this out. How does this work? Oh, you don't like this? Let me change this. Let me change this.
I think there's two definitions of product here, right? There's products that we go out and buy in the marketplace and then integrate. But then what we are offering internally to our users or externally in SIAM to those users, that is a product we're putting forward as well. And like I again regularly tell my team, what we do is frequently the worst interaction that a customer will have with our company, right? And it's not because we're particularly bad at, I think we're pretty good at identity and access management, but nobody wants to remember another password in their life. Nobody wakes up and goes, I've heard estimates 90 to 200 individual passwords. Man, I want another one, right? And please send a code to my phone that I left in the other room. And like all of that, like we are just asking them to do things they don't want to do. Yeah. And so if we can make that experience incrementally just a little bit better, it's massively better, right? You're pulling the pebble out of your shoe and going, oh, wow, the whole experience is so much better. If you can make the worst part a little bit better, it makes the whole thing feel a whole lot better.
Yeah, agreed. So with that, if we take a step back and look at the market as a whole, right, we're seeing consolidation on two efforts. One, identity companies and platforms are converging and trying to create these platforms and offering multiple things in one offering. Like, all you can eat, here you go. Here's your buffet. We'll give you everything. We'll give you external, we'll give you PAM, we'll give you governance, we'll give you SSO, like here, all together. But then two, we're also seeing a merge between like identity and security, right? Even though they've always been related, they've always been connected, but we just never really talked to each other. And now all of a sudden you're starting to see some through these products with creating identity security posture management platforms. We're starting to say, words like identity security. We want identity practitioners to think more like security. We want security to be more aware of identity. So when you look at those two kind of concepts in the overall market, like what's your take on that, Jamie? Especially from you, because you came from security kind of into identity, which is rare for most of us identity nerds. We were just kind of like, we kind of started at cybersecurity and was like, oh, what's this identity thing? And we stayed over here, right? Yep. we just kind of chilled out over here. Like, those cybersecurity people, they'll come over here eventually.
Yeah. I mean, largely, I think it's really good. I think it's a reaction to CISOs and organizations going, we can't do security well if we don't do identity well. It used to be, we kind of need to do it and we recognize it's one of the domains and whatever, but that's those weird guys over there. And threat teams, security operations teams, CISOs everywhere are going, if we're going to get popped, it's going to be an identity. And so you're pulling the identity people in and platforms into the core of what you're doing in security because you can't do it otherwise. So I do think what we're seeing is a maturity in this space, right? So like we went from, we were reusing passwords over and over and over again, and we saw those we were brute forcing passwords, and so you could just guess them. And then we kind of close that down. And then people were reusing passwords. And we've rolled out multi-factor fairly universally enough that I think we've seen that attack vector go down substantially. It's substantially harder for the bad actors to come in here. So we're seeing attacks then move to credential reset, right? They're just going to go, hey, I'm going to go around the whole process and grab both factors if that's what I need to do. And so in some ways, like, let's celebrate, man. Like, we've closed down some fundamental threat vectors and we've made the bad actors move to other areas. Like, that's a win. And as far as, and so when everyone was seeing authentication as the number one attack, right? If the Verizon DBIR every year, it's somewhere between 80 and 112% of attacks are somehow relate to stolen credentials. But if we begin closing that down and like we've tightened that control up, I would expect to see a market consolidation because there's just not as much money going out going, this is my number one problem I need to solve. Once we feel like we've driven that threat down, then I would fully expect for the market to go, okay, yeah, we're going to consolidate around the more mature, good solutions. And as far as integrating with other parts of the security stack, I think threat teams have largely driven that because they need to see the identity because it's a part of the kill chain. Are we allowed to say kill chain or do we have to pay Raytheon for that? I don't remember. It's a part of the kill chain coming in. And so if we're not looking at identity as a part of that, and so that breeds this natural integration, but you can end up getting a lot of cool things for free, right? An E5 license, at Microsoft gives you a whole lot more security tools and some pretty good security tools, some pretty well integrated security tools. I'm not saying they're the best of anything or the worst of anything, but like, I can't imagine a world 10, 15 years ago where we're like, oh yeah, we'll get our EDR software thrown in with our Microsoft Office license. And then, oh, by the way, you can do a whole bunch of security telemetry on the back end with that as well. Like, I for one welcome our consolidated overlords.
I like it.
Yeah, the E5 license has definitely sent some shockwaves throughout the industry and has a lot of product companies looking and going, yeah. Okay. Because to your point, that there is a lot there, right? And there is enough for you to build a very comprehensive program, both from a security and identity perspective, around these things that are there. And it is all together and in one place, which is, part of the struggles and the frustration that we've had, I would say in the last decade, is that we saw this investment come into cybersecurity. So we had all these products, all these solutions, all these things. And it was it's 100 different things all going different places. And what I kept seeing when I would read the, Verizon, data breach report or just, study these different breaches and read whatever they would release out of there is I just kept seeing the same pattern. It's like everybody had information of what was happening, but nobody had it in a consolidated manner to be able to say oh, this is why we knew this is where the breach happened. Because it's oh, well, the security team knew that or the AppSec team knew that, oh, well, it was this vulnerability of how they got in. Great. Security team knew that, oh, well, we were triggered on this log when we saw them log in, right? And the identity team could tell you at some point, it was oh, well, here's the account that gave them access. But nobody could say in one file swoop, here's everything that happened. To your point, you couldn't follow through the kill chain and connect everything, right? Yeah. It was desperately missing. And we try to solve that by just going, okay, partnerships, integrations. And when you did that, you put the bill on the customer and go, okay, well, customer, not only do you have to buy 6 products that all cost whatever they cost, now you've got to go integrate all of them. Oh, you don't have the people to do that? No problem. Here's KPMG or insert whatever you want now. And if you just pay them an additional probably 2x of what you just paid for the software license, they'll integrate all that for you. And then at the end of that, it's but you still can't figure it out. So to me, this was just a natural reaction to that. At some point, customers would be no, I need, all this needs to come together. I need to be able to see this, all together and make this kind of work for me. And that's where we are now. Now it brings up some interesting questions of this movement to cloud. I think has made us a little lazy in that, some of the typical things from when you learn all the domains of cyber, just, disaster recovery, right? Resiliency. Like, just because you said that it's now SaaS and it's cloud and somebody else does it and you aren't hosted on your servers doesn't mean that you are still not responsible for when it doesn't work. What do I do? When it goes down, when there's a network outage, like we're getting ready to experience a, Hurricane Milton at the time of this is storming towards Florida, right? If somebody's got a data center sitting in Florida and that gets hit and it goes down, and that just happens to be whatever you're doing is hosted, what are you going to do, right? Like, disaster recovery didn't go away because it went to the cloud and we said, I don't have to worry about it anymore, right? So it does bring, and so when you're talking about consolidating these things into one platform, it's like, okay, well now there's that, back to your point about risk, there's this risk of, well, all this is in this one vendor area, and if this thing goes down, what do I do now?
I was just going to, first, if you put your data center in Florida, then like we have more fundamental like planning issues to deal with. But I think the shared responsibility model has muddied this a lot. Like we think, to your point, like we've offloaded all the functionality to some third party, and it's like there's an insert magic here button in the architecture diagram, but it's shared responsibility. Like that word is there for a reason, right? Like if the configuration is lost, does your SaaS or PaaS vendor have a backup of that configuration? If you aren't confident and the answer is yes, the answer is probably no, right? Like there's vendors now who will help you back up your Okta configs. Okta doesn't have a backup of my Okta. No, like in the shared responsibility model, you are responsible for that. And it's not just Okta. Like most of the vendors we've interacted with have been like that. And I think there's this correction coming kind of post CrowdStrike where we're all going, whoa, maybe we didn't ask all of the right questions. And I'm not picking on them necessarily, although I will say I've had conversations with vendors that I just never thought I would have to say. Like, did you actually, test this on an actual operating system? Do you run everything in the kernel? Like things where you're like, but that, we don't necessarily think how much we've, given that all over to them. And the promise of SaaS and PaaS is that they can run it better than we can. Right? Fundamentally. And if one, they aren't committed to running all of it, that's an issue. And if they prove that they aren't in every aspect running it better than you can, like we still have this enterprise responsibility. Like our responsibilities is to our customers, right? I was stuck in Atlanta for 2 days because Delta and CrowdStrike, and it was unpleasant. But I promise you, the lines of hundreds of people I saw in the Atlanta airport that day were not interested in blaming CrowdStrike, right? They had one company's name in mind that messed this up. And we don't get to shift our responsibility to the as a service vendors just because they take part of it. Like we still have our responsibility to our customers, and we've got to take that seriously.
Yeah. 100%. It's the same. It's not just CrowdStrike. It's like if the food truck didn't show up to fill the cabin with the Delta cabin with the right food that was ordered, we're going to blame Delta. We're just going to blame the person the company we gave our money to for this stuff, right? We didn't pay CrowdStrike to support Delta, right? Completely agree with you. I don't know how much more I can add. You guys have said some things that my head is also, I'm like, there's a lot of cool things said here. So thank you.
Cool. All right, so we're gonna wrap up. Jim, we're gonna do rapid fire real quick. There's a couple of questions I want to throw at you and kind of get your response to. So first one is, let's say you've got a young up and coming leader in a business and they're gonna get handed the reins to identity, right? So, but they're just like, oh, I've never come into identity before. Maybe to make it easy for you, they have a similar background to you. They've been in cybersecurity and now all of a sudden they're taking over identity. With all your experience, what's the thing you would tell them?
I'll tell them the same thing that was told to me when I was coming into identity, which was run away. I'll tell them that first. But in a real sense of like, man, this is the hardest part of security. I really think that. It is more complex. It is more intertwined with a messy real world. It is not clean. So know what you're signing up for. But, do everything you can to simplify, right? Do not get over into the jungle of acronyms and everything else that, man, I've just watched so many people talking to identity people just kind of check out when they just sort of go into we federated via this protocol, but then we moved to that protocol, and then we, and then everyone goes, like, we need to articulate it in simple terms that people can understand, right? Like, are we sure the person is who they say they are? How are we sure that they have access to the thing that they need to have access? Like, how do we get down to the core principles? And I think it can actually serve a new leader really well to come in and go, nope, I need you to talk to me like a third grader. Nope, I need you to dumb it down. Because we get so lost in the details at times of what could be in the cool new thing we want to do that we lose the forest for the trees. And I think a new leader actually has an opportunity to go, hey, let's zoom out and talk about how do we serve the customer and what is it they need and what does the business need and how are we driving risk down?
Awesome. All right. Second one and actual last one. What was your favorite AWS leadership principle?
Oh, I think I have to go with ownership. Maybe it's just the first one occurring to me. Although Think Big was super fun. I could tell you some stories offline about just some Think Big conversations I was in that blew my mind, that were super fun. But overall ownership, just the idea, I think it's the biggest superpower that Amazon has is that they have clearly assigned responsibilities and they're really good at pushing responsibility and alignment and ownership down, where so many organizations, nobody feels empowered to actually do anything. It's got to go up and down the org before you can do anything. I think that's their superpower. If there's just one, is that they empower people to actually go, take action through ownership. So I'm a fan.
Okay, nice. Samir, what was yours?
I like the bias for action versus talking and kind of, churning, if you will. I like the bias for action. I think the Think Big one was very interesting, in terms of some of the offline conversations that we'll all have that Jamie mentioned. I think that was the big thing about Amazon that I think you're right, that it was always a think big company.
Cool. All right. Just to finish up the thread, mine was disagree and commit. I love that. And it was the bias for action was like right underneath it. Because those two to me were tied. I was like, let's have the conversation, let's agree or disagree, and then commit to what we're doing. Let's go do it. I love that. There's some aspects of it I miss, but other ones I don't. But that's another pod. Listen, Jamie, thanks so much for your time, man. This has been awesome. Been a great conversation. Thanks for coming on. You are welcome back anytime you want to come on, sir.
It's been a ton of fun, guys. Really appreciate the time. Keep doing the important work. Keep fighting the fight, getting the word out about identity and how we make it better and how we serve our users better out there. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, that's it. You guys know what it is. It's been the Identity Jedi Show. Don't forget to check out the IdentityJedi.com newsletter. www.theidentitijedi.com comes out every other Wednesday into your inbox. You can check this out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. It is streaming there. Make sure to like, rate, comment, subscribe. It all goes a long way, whatever you do. And of course, be good to each other, be kind to each other, love each other. We'll see you guys in the next episode.